I signed everything over to my stepchildren 3 weeks after my husband's funeral. The house, the lake property, the company shares, even the portrait of their mother that still hung above the dining room cabinet, watching me like I had been trespassing for 22 years. My friend Ruth told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My lawyer asked me twice if I understood what I was giving up. Even the notary paused before handing me the pen. But I signed anyway, page after page, clause after clause. Grant Caldwell smiled like a man who had finally removed a stain from the family name. His younger brother, Evan, looked relieved enough to call it grief. They thought I had surrendered. They thought the quiet widow had finally learned her place. Then their lawyer reached the final clause, read one line out loud, and stopped. Grant frowned. "Why did you stop?" The lawyer read the line again. His face went pale. And for the first time since Arthur died, neither of my stepsons had anything to say. My name is Marian Caldwell. I was 60 years old when I learned that silence is only weakness when you are using it to hide. Sometimes silence is how you listen. Sometimes silence is how you survive. And sometimes silence is how you let greedy people walk exactly where they were already headed. Arthur Caldwell was my husband for 22 years. He was successful, charming, stubborn, and far more tender in private than he ever allowed himself to be in public. He built Caldwell Freight and Storage from 3 trucks and a rented office into a company with contracts across 4 states. People respected him. Men stood straighter when he entered a room. Bankers returned his calls. Employees called him Mr. Caldwell, even after he told them to use Arthur. But at home, with his sons, he became smaller. Grant was 46, an attorney with a perfect office, perfect suits, and a way of making cruelty sound like procedure. Evan was 43, softer on the surface, the kind of man who could ask for money with tears in his eyes and still make you feel guilty for hesitating. Their mother, Lydia, had died years before I met Arthur. I never tried to replace her. I never asked them to call me Mom. I never moved her photographs. I never touched the silver tea set she loved. I thought respect would earn respect. That was my first mistake. At family dinners, Grant called me Marian in the same tone he used for waiters. Evan called me Mare when he needed something, and Dad's wife when he forgot I was in the room. Arthur noticed. Sometimes he would reach for my hand under the table. Later, when we were alone, he would say, "Give them time." I did. I gave them time. I gave them holidays, birthdays, hospital visits, polite smiles, quiet exits, and 22 years of not making things harder. Time did not soften them. It only taught them I would not fight back. On our 15th anniversary, Arthur gave me a wooden box of watercolor paints. I had been an art teacher before I married him. I used to teach teenagers how to look at a blank page without being afraid of it. Then life became busy. Arthur's business grew. His sons needed help. The house needed managing. His public life needed a calm wife beside him. Slowly, I stopped painting. When he gave me that box, I laughed and said, "One day, when the house is quiet." Arthur kissed my forehead. "It will be," he said. But the house was never quiet. It only learned how to hide its noise. Then Arthur got sick. At first, it was back pain. Then weight loss, then appointments, then a doctor who folded his hands before saying the word cancer. Grant came to the first appointment and left early for a client call. Evan came twice, cried in the hallway, and asked Arthur about a real estate account before driving home. I stayed. I learned the medication schedule. I slept in chairs. I warmed soup he could not eat. I held his hand through the nights when pain made him angry and fear made him honest. Once, at 3 a.m, he looked at me and whispered, "Marian, I should have done more." I thought he meant the company. I thought he meant the boys. I said, "Rest now." I wish I had asked him what he meant. Arthur died on a Sunday morning while rain tapped softly against the bedroom window. His funeral was 5 days later. Grant spoke about legacy. Evan cried into a handkerchief. I sat in the front row with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles hurt. Everyone told me I was strong. Strong is what people call you when they do not want to sit with your pain. After the funeral, people came back to the house. They ate, whispered, hugged me, and left. By dusk, only Grant and Evan remained. The lilies were still on the dining room table. Arthur's coat was still hanging by the back door. Grant stood near the fireplace with a folder in his hand. Evan sat on the sofa, rubbing his palms together. I knew that look. He used it before asking for help. Grant cleared his throat. "Marian, we need to talk about the estate." I stared at him. "Today?" It's better to be clear before emotions complicate things. Emotions. My husband had been buried that morning, and my grief was already being treated like an obstacle. Grant placed the folder on the coffee table. Evan and I believe the Caldwell assets should remain with the Caldwell family. I looked at him. I am Caldwell family. Evan looked away. Grant did not. You know what I mean. Yes, I did. That was the problem. Grant continued. The house, the lake property, and Dad's company shares were built before you became part of his life. It makes sense for those things to return to his bloodline. Return, I said quietly, like I borrowed them. Evan leaned forward. No one is saying that. We just don't want this to get ugly. There it was, the sentence people use when they are already making something ugly and want you to stay polite about it. Grant slid the papers toward me. You would keep the life insurance payout, $200,000. That's more than fair. And the medical bills? Grant's mouth tightened. Those were personal care expenses. You were his wife, but not his blood. Neither of them answered. That silence told me more than any insult could have. I looked at Arthur's empty chair. I thought about the man who once promised I would paint again. I thought about all the dinners where I swallowed words so nobody else would choke on the truth. Then I asked, "Is this what you both want?" Grant nodded immediately. Evan hesitated. Then he nodded too. "It's what Dad would have wanted," he said. That was when something inside me went still. Not calm, not brave, just still. The part of me that had spent years smoothing tablecloths over broken glass finally stopped reaching. "Send everything through the attorneys," I said. Grant blinked. He had expected tears, maybe anger, maybe a performance he could call unstable. Instead, I gave him procedure. "That's wise," he said. No, it was quiet. He mistook the two. Over the next week, their pressure became constant. Grant's office sent draft agreements. Evan called and left messages that began with, "I'm checking on you," and ended with, "Do you know where Dad kept the original property files?" A cousin called to say, Maybe you should let his sons have what brings them comfort. Comfort. Everyone had such gentle words for taking. I answered less and listened more. That was new for me. The old Marian would have explained. The old Marian would have said, I loved your father. I took care of him. I belong here too. But I had spent 22 years giving testimony to people who had already reached a verdict. So I stopped pleading my case. One afternoon, I went to the bank to close a small household account Arthur and I had used for groceries, repairs, and utilities. The manager, Linda Morales, recognized Arthur's name and softened immediately. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Caldwell. Thank you. She clicked through the records, then paused. Your husband came in several months ago. My heart tightened. For this account? No. She lowered her voice. I can't share details without authorization, but he had documents notarized. Very specific instructions. Thomas Reed would know more. Arthur's attorney? She nodded. He asked twice if everything would remain separate. Separate. The words stayed with me all the way to my car. Arthur had barely been strong enough to walk across our bedroom in those months. But he had gone to the bank. He had signed something. He had planned. That afternoon, I called Thomas Reed. Thomas had been Arthur's attorney for nearly 30 years. He was calm in the way only old lawyers and old doctors can be calm. His office smelled like paper, leather, and coffee that had been reheated too many times. After I told him what Grant and Evan wanted, he leaned back and said, Are they pressuring you? Politely, I said. That is usually how people take more than they deserve. For the first time since the funeral, I almost smiled. Thomas opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in Arthur's handwriting. Marian. My fingers shook before I even opened it. The letter was short. Arthur had never used 10 words when 5 would do. Marian, if you are reading this, then I have left you with pain I should have carried better while I was alive. I told myself keeping peace between you and the boys was kindness. It wasn't. It was cowardice dressed as patience. I love my sons, but I know what hunger sounds like when it calls itself legacy. If they come to you with love, Thomas will help you be generous. If they come with hunger, let them be fed by what they chose. You were never a guest in my life. Forgive me for letting anyone make you feel like one. Arthur. I read it once, then again. By the third time, the words blurred. Thomas said nothing. I was grateful. Some grief does not want comfort right away. It wants a witness. When I could speak, I asked, What did he do? Thomas folded his hands. Arthur created a private trust while he was fully competent. It is separate from the estate assets Grant is requesting. It includes several investment accounts, a small house in Vermont, and the old studio property on Briar Street. I stared at him. The brick carriage house? Yes. My throat closed. Years earlier, Arthur and I had driven past that building. It had tall windows, red brick, and beautiful north light. I had said, just once, that would make a perfect studio. Arthur had remembered. Thomas continued. There is something else. Caldwell Freight is not as clean as Grant believes. Arthur spent the last 2 years trying to stabilize it. There are tax problems, pending obligations, and personal guarantees tied to certain business interests. My stomach dropped. Do the boys know? Grant knows enough to be careful. Unfortunately for him, he seems too angry to be careful. Evan likely knows nothing. If I fight them, you can, but it will be expensive, public, and cruel. And if I give them what they asked for? Thomas held my eyes. Then they receive what they asked for, all of it, including what is attached. I looked down at Arthur's letter. For years, I had been the cushion between his sons and consequences. Maybe Arthur had been too. Maybe that was why they mistook comfort for ownership. Can the documents be written clearly? I asked. Very clearly. Can they be required to acknowledge what they are accepting? Yes. And can I avoid explaining it to them? Thomas almost smiled. That may be the smartest question you've asked. So I let them write their own trap. Not because I tricked them, because I stopped interrupting them. Grant emailed a list of everything he wanted transferred. The house, the lake property, voting interests, company shares, heirlooms, and all related Caldwell family assets without future interference from Mrs. Caldwell. He used my married name only when it made me sound like a legal obstacle. I forwarded the email to Thomas. He called 5 minutes later. Keep this, he said. This matters. Evan came by the house 2 days later with soup in a glass container. That was Evan's way. He brought something small before asking for something large. Mayor, he said, standing in my kitchen, you know this isn't personal, right? I looked at him. It feels personal. He sighed. Dad built that company for us. He built it while I was married to him. You know what I mean. I did. I always knew what they meant. That had been the trouble. I asked, did you ever think of me as family? Evan looked wounded. That's not fair. It's a simple question. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, you were important to Dad. It was probably the kindest answer he had. It still left me outside. I nodded. Thank you for the soup. After he left, I poured it down the sink. Not because I hated him, because I was done swallowing small offerings and pretending they were love. The final signing was scheduled for a Friday morning in Thomas Reed's conference room. Rain streaked the windows. Of course it did. Grief had made weather feel personal. Grant arrived first with his attorney, Paul Sutter, a thin man with expensive glasses and the confidence of someone paid not to doubt his client. Evan arrived late, breathless, pretending he had not been fighting panic. I arrived last. I wore a navy dress and no wedding ring. I had taken it off the night before and placed it in the wooden watercolor box Arthur had given me years ago. Not because I stopped loving him, because I needed both hands free. Grant noticed. His eyes flicked to my bare finger. Ready? He asked. Yes, I said. We sat. Thomas explained each document. Transfer of residential property. Transfer of lake property. Transfer of company interests. Release of claims. Acknowledgement of independent counsel. Grant looked satisfied. Evan looked relieved. Paul Sutter looked bored. I signed where Thomas pointed. My hand did not shake. Marian Caldwell, line after line. When I finished, Grant leaned back. I think Dad would be relieved this stayed in the family. I could have answered. I could have told him his father died afraid of exactly this moment. I could have told him Arthur wrote me a letter because he knew legacy could become a prettier word for greed. But I had learned something by then. Not every truth needs to be thrown. Some truths are heavier when placed gently on the table. Thomas gathered the pages. "Before execution is complete," he said, "Mr. Sutter will read the assumption clause into the record." Paul frowned. "Is that necessary?" Thomas said. "Given the scope your clients requested, yes." Grant waved a hand. "Read it." Paul adjusted his glasses. "The accepting parties acknowledge receipt of all associated rights, interests, responsibilities." His voice was quick at first, then it slowed. "Including, but not limited to, liabilities, encumbrances, personal guarantees, pending tax exposures, operational obligations, and any attached financial responsibilities connected to the transferred Caldwell business interests." He stopped. Evan lifted his head. Grant said, "Why did you stop?" Paul did not answer. He read the sentence again, silently this time. His face changed color. Grant's voice sharpened. "Paul, keep reading." Paul swallowed. "The accepting parties further acknowledge that Marian Caldwell assumes no continuing obligation to satisfy, manage, offset, guarantee, or personally support any such liabilities following execution of this agreement." The room went silent. It was not an empty silence. It was full of every word they had used against me. Legacy, bloodline, family assets, fairness. Grant stared at the page. "What does that mean?" Thomas answered calmly. "It means Mrs. Caldwell has transferred exactly what your written request demanded, the assets and the obligations attached to them." Evan turned pale. "Obligations?" Grant snapped. "The company has ordinary debt. That's normal." Thomas opened a folder. "Some debt is ordinary. Some of these obligations are not. Your attorney had access to the due diligence materials." Paul looked like he wanted to disappear. "Grant, I advised review before execution." Grant turned on him. "You said she was giving up value." I looked at Grant then, not with anger. Anger would have given him too much of me. "You asked me to step away," I said. "So I did." Evan's voice cracked. "Marian, we can fix this, as a family." There it was again. Family. The word they reached for only after the bill arrived. The old me would have softened. The old me would have heard fear and mistaken it for love. The old me would have helped them climb out and thanked them for needing me. But the old me was not sitting in that chair anymore. "We were family when I was useful," I said. "Today, I'm respecting your wishes." Grant stood so fast his chair hit the wall. "This is fraud." Thomas did not raise his voice. "No, this is execution of the transfer your clients requested in writing. Mrs. Caldwell did not conceal the liabilities. She did not misrepresent the assets. She agreed to your terms." Grant looked at me like he hated me. Not because I had lied, because I had finally stopped saving him from his own certainty. "And what do you get?" he asked. Thomas placed a separate folder in front of me. "Mrs. Caldwell is the beneficiary of a private trust established by Arthur Caldwell 18 months before his death. It is separate from the transferred assets and was not part of your written request." Evan whispered, "What trust?" Thomas continued, "It includes investment accounts, a residence in Vermont, and the Briar Street studio property." Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For once, silence belonged to me. "You planned this," he said at last. I shook my head. "No, Grant, you planned this. I stopped warning you." Thomas closed the folder. "Mrs. Caldwell is free to leave." Free. Such a small word. It felt too large to hold. I stood. Evan said, Marian. I stopped, but I did not turn all the way back. Did Dad know we would do this? He asked. I thought about lying. It would have been easier for him, but I had spent too many years making truth comfortable for other people. He hoped you wouldn't, I said. He prepared in case you did. I walked out without the house, without the company, without a place at the Caldwell table. Then I reached my car, closed the door, and cried until the rain on the windshield blurred with everything I had held back. That is the part people forget. Winning still hurts. Leaving still hurts. Being right does not make betrayal painless. I cried for Arthur. I cried for the family I had tried to earn. I cried for the woman who thought if she was patient enough, useful enough, quiet enough, one day someone would turn to her and say, "You belong here." But when the crying stopped, I did not feel empty. I felt tired, then lighter. A few months later, I moved into the little house in Vermont. It had uneven floors, a stubborn front door, and a maple tree outside the kitchen window. I unpacked Arthur's watercolor box on a Monday morning. Some tubes had dried out, some had not. I painted the tree badly. Then I painted it again. By autumn, I opened the Briar Street studio. I called it the North Light Room. At first, 3 women came, then 7, then more. Widows, divorced women, retired nurses, women whose children only called when they needed something. We painted bowls of fruit, old houses, hands, windows, flowers. Sometimes the paintings were terrible. Sometimes they were beautiful. Sometimes someone cried quietly and nobody rushed to stop her. We had all been rushed enough. Evan called once in December. "I'm not asking for money," he said quickly. "I just need the name of Dad's financial advisor." I gave him the name, nothing more. After a pause, he said, "I'm sorry, Marian." I waited for the excuse. It did not come, so I said, "I hope you mean that." "I do." "Then let it change you." That was the last real conversation we had. Grant never apologized. Last I heard, he tells people I manipulated Arthur while he was dying. Maybe he believes it. Some people would rather live inside a lie they built than stand in front of the truth someone else handed them. I no longer need him to understand. As for Arthur, I forgave him slowly. Not because he was perfect. He was not. He should have defended me sooner. He should have spoken at those dinners. He should have told his sons that blood without respect is not family. But in the end, he saw me. Late, yes. Imperfectly, yes. But he saw me. And he left me a door. I had to be the one to walk through it. Looking back, the day I signed everything away was not the day I lost the Caldwell family. It was the day I stopped begging to belong to it. I did not take revenge on Grant. I did not take revenge on Evan. My quiet revenge was against the woman I used to be. The woman who stayed silent because she was afraid to be alone. The woman who thought being needed was the same as being loved. I gave my stepchildren everything they wanted. The house, the shares, the name, the burden. And for the first time in 22 years, I kept myself. If you were in Marian's place, would you fight them loudly? Or would you walk away and let them carry exactly what they asked for?